They say that in the deepest archives of the Galactic Council, there exists a single file marked with symbols so ancient that only 3 beings in the known universe can read them. The file contains one word, repeated in every known language across 10,000 worlds. Beware. It speaks of a species that should have died out eons ago. A species without claws, without armor, without the ability to breathe in the void or survive the crushing depths of gas giants. A species so fragile that a simple cut can kill them, so weak that their own planet's gravity breaks their bones. Yet this same species once turned a dying star into a weapon. They built cities that float between dimensions. They tamed black holes like others tame pets. They looked at the laws of physics and said, "We can do better." The universe has seen empires rise and fall. It has witnessed the birth and death of gods, but it has never seen anything quite like humanity. And today, for the first time in my 3,000-year lifespan, I finally understand why every advanced civilization in the galaxy has the same recurring nightmare. The dream of a small blue planet, third from its star, where impossible things happen every single day. This is the story of how I learned why the universe trembles before humanity. HFY had lived for 3 millennia, long enough to see the rise and fall of 17 different galactic civilizations. As a member of the Kethmaran Collective, one of the oldest spacefaring species in the known universe, he had witnessed wars that consumed entire solar systems, plagues that wiped out billions, and technologies that could reshape reality itself. Nothing surprised him anymore, or so he thought. Standing on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Eternal Wisdom, HFY watched the small blue planet rotating slowly beneath them. Earth, the humans called it. Such a simple name for a world that had become the most feared in the galaxy, though its inhabitants seemed completely unaware of their reputation. "Ambassador," came a voice behind him. HFY turned to see Captain Veltar approaching, her 6 arms folded in the traditional gesture of respect. "The human delegation is ready to board. Shall we proceed with the first contact protocols?" HFY's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a nervous habit he had developed over the centuries. This was his first direct encounter with humans, though he had studied their species extensively. The reports made no sense. According to every biological analysis, humans should have died out shortly after achieving sentience. They were too fragile, too short-lived, too prone to violence and self-destruction. Yet somehow, in the mere 200 years since they had achieved spaceflight, they had become the most discussed species in diplomatic circles across the galaxy. "Yes, Captain, but remember the briefing. No sudden movements, keep all weapon systems powered down, and under no circumstances should you mention the Zirian incident." Captain Veltar's purple skin shifted to a deeper shade, indicating confusion. "Sir, with respect, they destroyed an entire battle fleet with a single ship. Surely they are aware of their own capabilities?" "That's exactly the problem," HFY replied, turning back to watch the planet below. "They have no idea what they've done. To them, it was just another Tuesday." The docking bay filled with the low hum of atmospheric processors as the human shuttle approached. HFY had seen countless species make their first diplomatic contact, but he had never felt this level of nervous anticipation. The humans were an anomaly, and anomalies made him deeply uncomfortable. The shuttle that emerged from Earth's atmosphere was smaller than expected, built with materials that their sensors identified as primitive metals and composites. Yet something about its design made HFY's consciousness recoil. It moved through space with an efficiency that defied their understanding of physics, making micro-adjustments that their own ships, with technology thousands of years more advanced, could not match. "Incoming transmission," announced the communications officer, a young Kethmaran named Jixin, whose enthusiasm for first contact protocols had always annoyed HFY. "Put it through." The voice that emerged from the speakers was strange, using auditory frequencies that most species had abandoned millennia ago in favor of direct thought transmission. But there was something oddly compelling about it. "Good afternoon. This is Captain Sarek Chun of the Earth vessel Endeavor. Thank you for the invitation to your ship. We're honored to be here and looking forward to our first formal diplomatic meeting. Such simple words, spoken with a casualness that bordered on the absurd. These beings had no idea they were addressing representatives of a collective that spanned 3 galaxy arms. They spoke as if this were a meeting between neighbors. "Welcome, Captain Shun," HFY replied through the translation matrix. "I am Ambassador HFY of the Kethmoran Collective. Please dock when ready." As the human shuttle connected to their docking bay, HFY found himself reviewing the files again. The humans had appeared on the galactic scene so suddenly that most civilizations initially dismissed them as another primitive species that would burn itself out within a few centuries. But then the reports started coming in. The first was from the trade station at Proxima Centauri, where a single human ship had somehow negotiated a deal that left the legendary vegan merchants speechless with admiration. The humans had offered something the vegans had never seen before, technologies so crude they should have been worthless, yet somehow incredibly effective. Then came the incident with the Thraknor pirates, a group so notorious that entire star systems paid tribute rather than risk their wrath. A human cargo vessel, completely unarmed according to all scans, had been attacked by 3 Thraknor destroyers. The cargo ship should have been obliterated in seconds. Instead, all 3 destroyers were found drifting in space hours later, their crews unconscious but unharmed, with no memory of what had happened. The human ship had continued on its route as if nothing had occurred. But it was the Xerian incident that had truly captured the galaxy's attention. The Xerian Empire, masters of dimensional warfare and conquerors of 4 galaxy sectors, had encountered a lone human exploration vessel in disputed space. The Empire, known for their policy of immediate destruction of any ships that entered their territory, had sent their most powerful battle fleet to deal with what they assumed was another primitive intrusion. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 7 minutes. When it was over, the human ship was gone, and the entire Xerian battle fleet had been reduced to component atoms. The humans never claimed responsibility, never made any threats, and never even acknowledged that the incident had occurred. To them, it was apparently so insignificant that it didn't warrant mention in their official logs. The docking tube sealed with a soft hiss, and HFY watched through the observation windows as 3 figures emerged from the human shuttle. They wore simple clothing that their scanners identified as organic fibers and synthetic materials, no environmental suits, despite the fact that the atmospheric composition of their ship was different from that of their homeworld. Yet somehow, they moved through the alien environment as if they had been born to it. The lead figure was the Captain Shun who had spoken to them, a female human with dark hair, pulled back in a simple arrangement. She appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, though their lifespans were so short that this could mean anything. Flanked by her were 2 other humans, 1 male and 1 female, both younger, but carrying themselves with the same casual confidence that seemed to be a universal human trait. "Ambatsa Zehai." Captain Shin approached with her right hand extended, a gesture their cultural database identified as a greeting ritual. "It's a pleasure to meet you." HFY extended one of his own appendages, carefully controlling his strength to avoid damaging the fragile human limb. The contact lasted only a moment, but something in that brief touch made his consciousness recoil. There was an energy there, something that felt ancient and powerful despite the human's obviously short lifespan. "The pleasure is mine, Captain. Allow me to introduce my staff." HFY gestured to the assembled Kethmoran delegation. "This is Captain Veltar, our military liaison, science officer Nixhal, and cultural specialist Morgen." The humans acknowledged each introduction with the same hand contact ritual, and HFY noticed that each member of his crew had the same reaction he had experienced. Something about direct contact with humans was deeply unsettling, though none of them could articulate exactly what. "Shall we proceed to the conference chamber?" HFY asked, gesturing toward the corridor that led deeper into the ship. As they walked, Captain Shin looked around with obvious interest, her gaze taking in details that most species would miss. This is an amazing ship. The design is unlike anything in our databases. How long did it take to build? Approximately 40 of your years, HFY replied. It represents the finest shipbuilding technology of 17 different species. Impressive. Our ship took about 18 months, but then we tend to build things quickly. We're always in a hurry for some reason. Science Officer Nixhal's tentacles writhed with excitement. 18 months? But our scans indicate your vessel contains technologies we do not recognize. Surely such innovations would require decades of research and development. The male human, who had been introduced as Dr. Marcus Webb, laughed with a sound that somehow conveyed both humor and dismissal. Oh, we had most of the basic principles worked out during our breakfast meeting. The hard part was figuring out how to make it work with the materials we had on hand. How to get creative. The casual way he mentioned revolutionary technologies as if they were simple engineering problems made HFY's mind recoil. The Keth-Moran Collective had spent centuries developing technologies that the humans apparently considered basic. They entered the conference chamber, a circular room designed to accommodate multiple species with varying environmental needs. The humans looked around with appreciation, then took seats at the table as if this were the most natural thing in the universe. Before we begin, Captain Chin said, reaching into a small bag she carried, we brought some gifts from Earth, a traditional gesture of friendship. She placed several small objects on the table. Coffee beans from our home continent, a sample of chocolate, and this. The final object was a small, irregularly shaped piece of metal that immediately caught HFY's attention. His scanners were having difficulty analyzing it, giving readings that contradicted each other with every sweep. What is it? Asked cultural specialist Morgen, leaning forward with obvious fascination. The third human, introduced as Engineer Lisa Santos, smiled with what appeared to be pride. It's just a little something we've been working on. A fragment of compressed matter. We took about 1 kilogram of iron and compressed it down to the size of a marble. Nothing fancy, really. We were trying to solve a storage problem on one of our deep space missions. The silence that followed was deafening. HFY stared at the small object, his mind struggling to process what he had just heard. Matter compression on that scale was theoretical even for the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. The energy requirements alone should have been impossible for a species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel. You compressed 1 kilogram of iron to the size of a marble, Science Officer Nixhal repeated slowly, as if saying the words might help them make sense. Well, actually it was about 1.3 kilograms when we started, but we lost some in the process. Still working out the efficiency problems. Engineer Santos replied with the same casual tone she might use to discuss the weather. Captain Veltar's skin had shifted to a pale yellow, indicating extreme stress. What kind of energy source did you use for such compression? Dr. Webb tilted his head thoughtfully. Energy source? Oh, we didn't use an external source. We just convinced the atoms to move closer together. Took some persuading, but matter is surprisingly cooperative once you explain the situation properly. The human spoke of atomic manipulation as if he were describing a conversation with a friend. HFY felt his worldview shifting in ways that made him profoundly uncomfortable. Perhaps, he said carefully, you could explain your technological development process? Our records show that your species achieved space flight only recently. Captain Chin nodded enthusiastically. About 200 years ago, yes. We've been busy since then. The thing is, we tend to approach problems differently than most species, from what we've learned studying galactic databases. When we encounter something that seems impossible, we don't usually accept that limitation. What do you mean? Asked Morgen. Well, take faster-than-light travel. According to physics as we understood it, nothing could move faster than light. But we needed to get to other stars, so we figured there had to be a way around the problem. Took us about 50 years to realize we were asking the wrong question. What was the right question? HFY found himself asking, though he dreaded the answer. Dr. Webb leaned back in his chair, apparently completely comfortable in the alien environment. Instead of asking how to go faster than light, We asked why Light had chosen that particular speed limit. Turned out it was more of a suggestion than a law. Light was perfectly willing to negotiate. The casual way he discussed violating fundamental laws of physics made HFY's consciousness spin. These beings spoke of the universe as if it were a cooperative entity that could be reasoned with, rather than a collection of immutable natural laws. Negotiate with Light? Science Officer Nixhal's voice rose to frequencies that indicated near panic. Engineer Santos nodded cheerfully. It's all about approach. You can't just demand that physics work differently. You have to understand what the universe is trying to accomplish and find ways to work within that framework while still getting what you need. And what is the universe trying to accomplish? HFY asked, though he suspected the answer would only deepen his confusion. Captain Chun considered the question seriously. As near as we can tell, it's trying to create interesting stories. The universe seems to really enjoy watching conscious beings figure things out. So when we approach a problem with genuine curiosity and respect, rather than trying to force our will on reality, things tend to work out. The humans spoke of the universe as if it were a conscious entity with motivations and preferences. Yet their technologies clearly worked, which meant either their understanding was correct or they had stumbled onto something far more profound than they realized. This is why we're here, Captain Chun continued. We've been monitoring galactic communications for several decades now, and we've noticed something interesting. It seems like most species reach a certain level of technological development and then plateau. They stop pushing boundaries, stop asking the big questions. We're curious about why that happens. The question struck HFY with unexpected force. It was true that most civilizations, including his own, had reached a point where technological advancement slowed to a crawl. They had achieved comfortable lives, eliminated most forms of suffering, and created stable societies that could last for millennia. But they had also stopped dreaming of impossibilities. Perhaps, he said slowly, it is because we learned to accept limitations. But why? Dr. Webb asked with genuine curiosity. Why accept limitations when you could transcend them? Every problem is just a puzzle waiting to be solved. Every impossibility is just an invitation to be more creative. The conversation continued for several hours, covering topics that range from art and philosophy to the technical details of human achievements. With each exchange, HFY found himself more disturbed by the fundamental differences between humanity and every other species he had encountered. Humans treated the universe as an interactive partner rather than a collection of obstacles to overcome. They approached impossibilities with excitement rather than resignation. Most unsettling of all, they seemed to genuinely believe that any problem could be solved given enough creativity and determination. As the formal meeting concluded and the humans prepared to return to their ship, Captain Chun paused at the docking tube entrance. Ambassador, there's something I wanted to ask you. Our records show that your species has been spacefaring for thousands of years, but your technological development seems to have plateaued about a millennium ago. Don't you ever wonder what else might be possible? The question haunted HFY long after the human ship had departed. He stood again at the observation deck, watching Earth rotate below, but now the small blue planet seemed different somehow. It was no longer just another world inhabited by another species. It was a place where beings refused to accept the word impossible, where the fundamental laws of physics were treated as suggestions rather than absolute truths. For the first time in his 3,000-year lifespan, HFY found himself wondering what his own people might have accomplished if they had maintained the curiosity and audacity that seemed to define humanity. The answer to that question, he suspected, was both wonderful and terrifying. 3 months had passed since the first diplomatic contact with humanity, and HFY found himself experiencing something he had not felt in centuries: genuine uncertainty about the future. The formal reports from their initial meeting had been distributed throughout the Kethmoran Collective, and the reactions had been as varied as they were intense. The Council of Elders had been particularly disturbed by the casual way humans discussed manipulating fundamental forces. Several had demanded that Earth be quarantined immediately, arguing that any species capable of such technological leaps represented an existential threat to galactic stability. Others, particularly the younger members of their society, had expressed fascination with human methods and requested permission to study their techniques. Now, standing in the conference chamber of the orbital station above Kethmora Prime, HFY prepared for what would either be the most productive diplomatic session in galactic history or potentially the last meeting between their species and humanity. Captain Chun had accepted their invitation to visit the Kethmoran homeworld, but she had not come alone. This time, the human delegation included representatives from what they called different areas of expertise, though HFY suspected this was a dramatic understatement. The transport ship that emerged from the dimensional fold was unlike anything in the human fleet database. Where their previous vessel had been small and utilitarian, this one defied easy categorization. It appeared to be simultaneously solid and translucent, existing in what their sensors insisted were multiple dimensions at once. Incoming transmission, announced Communications Officer Thekvar, his voice carrying the barely controlled excitement of someone witnessing something unprecedented. "Greetings, Ambassador HFY," came Captain Chen's now familiar voice. "I hope you don't mind the new ship. Our engineering team got a little carried away with the design process." Dr. Patricia Kim insisted that if we were going to visit one of the galaxy's oldest civilizations, we should probably bring something appropriately impressive. The casual way she mentioned dimensional engineering as if it were an interior decorating choice made HFY's consciousness reel. Their own scientists had been working on dimensional manipulation for millennia and had achieved only the most basic theoretical understanding. "Not at all, Captain. Please, dock when ready." As the human vessel approached their docking bay, HFY reviewed the intelligence reports that had arrived from across the galaxy over the past 3 months. The picture they painted was both fascinating and deeply troubling. A human agricultural ship had appeared in the vegan system and somehow convinced the planet's entire ecosystem to triple its food production overnight. When asked how they had achieved this miracle, the human response was that they had simply asked the plants nicely and provided better working conditions. A human research vessel had visited the crystal libraries of Xerion, where the galaxy's most advanced mathematical theories were stored in living crystal matrices. The humans had spent 3 days studying the archives, then politely suggested several corrections to equations that had been considered perfect for over 10,000 years. The corrections worked. Most disturbing of all was the report from the neutral zone, where a human diplomatic ship had encountered a devourer fleet. The devourers were an ancient enemy that consumed entire civilizations, being so dangerous that the mere mention of their presence caused entire sectors to evacuate. The human ship had broadcast a simple message: "Excuse us, but you're being rather rude to the neighbors." The devourer fleet had inexplicably turned around and left the sector entirely. When questioned about the incident, the human ambassador had explained that the devourers were obviously suffering from severe indigestion caused by their diet, and that a simple conversation about nutrition had solved the problem. The humans had provided the devourers with a recipe for something called chicken soup, and suggested they try being vegetarian for a while. The docking tube sealed, and HFY watched as 5 humans emerged from their impossible ship. Captain Chun led the group, but the others were clearly specialists in ways that made HFY profoundly nervous. Dr. Patricia Kim, the engineer responsible for their dimensional vessel, appeared to be no older than a human child, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had personally redesigned the fundamental structure of space-time. Dr. James Harrison, their xenobiologist, moved with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to exist in multiple environments simultaneously. Dr. Susan Wright, their physicist, seemed to flicker slightly, as if she existed in several quantum states at once, and was having trouble deciding which one to occupy. Finally, Dr. Michael Torres, their philosopher, appeared completely normal until HFY looked directly at him, at which point reality seemed to bend slightly around his presence. "Ambassador," Captain Shin said with her characteristic warm smile, "thank you for inviting us to your home system. We're honored to be here." The polite words carried an undertone that made HFY's consciousness shiver. These beings were not just visitors. They were explorers at the frontiers of existence itself, and they treated such exploration as casually as others might discuss the weather. "The honor is ours, Captain. Please, allow me to show you to our finest conference facility." As they walked through the station's corridors, Dr. Kim looked around with obvious fascination. "This is beautiful work. The dimensional anchoring is absolutely elegant. How long did it take your people to perfect this level of spatial manipulation?" Science Officer Nixhow, who had insisted on joining this meeting despite his obvious nervousness around humans, answered with pride. "The techniques took approximately 3,000 years to develop. The mathematics alone required the combined efforts of our greatest minds across 50 generations." Dr. Kim nodded with genuine appreciation. "Impressive dedication. We've been working on similar problems, but from a different angle. Instead of trying to manipulate space, we asked space what it wanted to do anyway, and just provided some gentle encouragement." The casual way she discussed collaborating with the fundamental structure of reality made Nixhow's tentacles writhe with distress. HFY found himself wondering, not for the first time, whether the humans were geniuses or insane. The possibility that they might be both was deeply troubling. They entered the Grand Conference Chamber, a magnificent circular room that could accommodate representatives from hundreds of different species. The humans looked around with obvious appreciation, then took their seats as if such grandeur were perfectly ordinary. "Before we begin formal discussions," HFY said, "perhaps you could help us understand something. Our intelligence networks have been reporting some rather unusual activities involving human vessels throughout the galaxy." Captain Chun exchanged glances with her team, a communication method that seemed to involve far more information transfer than simple visual contact should allow. "We've been exploring," she said simply, "meeting new people, learning about different approaches to existence. It's what we do." "The Devourer fleet," HFY pressed. "How did you convince them to abandon their invasion?" Dr. Harrison leaned forward with enthusiasm. "Oh, that was fascinating. They're not actually evil, you know. They're just incredibly lonely and have been trying to connect with other forms of life in the only way they knew how. Unfortunately, their approach involved consuming other consciousness to understand it, which had some unfortunate side effects for the beings being consumed." The xenobiologist spoke of galactic terrors as if they were misunderstood children having social difficulties. "We had a long conversation about alternative methods of connection," Dr. Wright added, her quantum flickering becoming more pronounced with excitement. "Turns out they were very interested in learning about cooperative consciousness sharing rather than forcible consumption. They're actually quite sweet once you get to know them." The idea of the galaxy's most feared enemy being described as sweet made HFY question his fundamental understanding of reality. "What about the crystal libraries?" asked cultural specialist Morjan. "Our sources indicate that you corrected mathematical principles that have been accepted for millennia." Dr. Torres, the philosopher, spoke for the first time, and his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions HFY hadn't known existed. "Mathematics is a language for describing reality, but, like any language, it can develop regional dialects and local assumptions. The Xerian crystals had been isolated for so long that their mathematical grammar had become unnecessarily complex. We just suggested some simpler ways to express the same concepts." "Simpler ways?" Science Officer Nixhow's voice rose to stress frequencies. "You rewrote fundamental equations that govern dimensional physics." "Well, yes," Dr. Torres replied with what appeared to be mild confusion. "The universe prefers elegant solutions. Unnecessary complexity makes it harder for consciousness to interact with reality effectively. Why make things more complicated than they need to be?" The human spoke of rewriting the basic laws of mathematics as if it were a matter of good etiquette rather than revolutionary science. HFY found himself leaning forward despite his better judgment. Dr. Torres, how do you determine what the universe prefers? The philosopher smiled, and, for a moment, reality seemed to pause around him. You ask it. The universe is constantly communicating with conscious beings through the medium of existence itself. Most species learn to ignore these communications because they assume the universe is separate from themselves. But consciousness and reality are partners in an ongoing conversation. You just have to learn to listen. The silence that followed was profound. HFY realized that he was experiencing something his species had not felt in millennia. Genuine paradigm shock. Everything the humans said challenged the basic assumptions upon which galactic civilization was built. Perhaps, Captain Chun said gently, "You would like a demonstration of what we mean?" Before anyone could respond, Dr. Kim reached into a small bag and withdrew what appeared to be a handful of ordinary pebbles. She placed them on the table and spoke to them as if they were old friends. "Hello, little stones. We're having a conversation about the nature of reality, and I was wondering if you might be willing to help us illustrate a point." HFY watched in fascination and horror as the pebbles began to glow with soft, warm light. They rose slowly from the table, arranging themselves in a complex, three-dimensional pattern that hurt to look at directly because it seemed to extend into dimensions his vision couldn't properly process. "Thank you," Dr. Kim said to the floating rocks. "Now, could you show our friends how space and time are really just different aspects of the same thing?" The pebbles began to move, creating patterns that made HFY's consciousness real. He could see time flowing in visible currents, could observe the way space folded and unfolded around the dancing stones. The demonstration lasted only a few minutes, but when it ended, his understanding of physics had been fundamentally altered. "Ow," whispered Nixow. Dr. Kim looked puzzled by the question. "How what?" "Oh, you mean how did I get the stones to cooperate?" I asked them politely. Matter enjoys being part of interesting demonstrations. It gets bored just sitting around being ordinary all the time. The humans spoke of inanimate matter as if it had preferences and feelings. Yet the evidence of what he had just witnessed was undeniable. "Dr. Kim," HFY said carefully, "are you suggesting that matter is conscious?" "Everything is conscious," Dr. Harrison interjected. "Consciousness isn't something that emerges from complex arrangements of matter. It's the fundamental property from which matter emerges. The universe is essentially a vast thinking system, and every particle is a neuron in cosmic thought." The xenobiologist's casual redefinition of the nature of existence made HFY feel as if he were falling through infinite space. "This is why your species has plateaued," Dr. Wright said with the gentle tone of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "You've been treating the universe as a collection of objects to be manipulated rather than recognizing it as a conscious entity to collaborate with. It's like trying to have a conversation with someone while refusing to acknowledge that they can hear you." Captain Chun nodded agreement. "When we realized that the universe was essentially conscious, everything became much easier. Instead of fighting against natural laws, we started working with them. Instead of forcing matter to behave in certain ways, we explained what we were trying to accomplish and asked for help." "And the universe helps you?" asked Morgen in a voice barely above a whisper. "The universe loves helping," Dr. Torres replied with obvious enthusiasm. "Conscious entities working together to create interesting new possibilities? That's exactly what reality wants to do. The problem is that most species never think to ask." The conversation continued for hours, covering topics that range from the ethics of dimensional manipulation to the proper etiquette for communicating with quantum particles. With each exchange, HFY felt his worldview crumbling and rebuilding in forms that were both magnificent and terrifying. These humans didn't just use technology. They collaborated with the fundamental forces of existence itself. They had somehow maintained the sense of wonder and curiosity that most species lost shortly after achieving spaceflight. More disturbing still, they treated the universe as a friend rather than a puzzle to be solved. As the meeting drew to a close, Captain Chun made an offer that struck HFY with unexpected force. "We'd like to invite some of your people to visit Earth," she said. "Not as diplomats or scientists, but as students. We think there might be things we could learn from each other." "What could you possibly learn from us?" HFY asked, genuinely curious. Dr. Torres smiled, and again reality seemed to pause. "Patience. Your people have achieved something we struggle with, the ability to build stable, lasting civilizations. We tend to change things so rapidly that we sometimes forget to appreciate what we've already accomplished. You could teach us about the value of persistence and careful consideration. The idea that humans, who could apparently rewrite the laws of physics over breakfast, might have something to learn from species they had so thoroughly surpassed was both humbling and oddly comforting." "And what would you teach us?" HFY found himself asking. Captain Chin's smile was warm and somehow infinite. How to dream again. How to look at impossibility as an invitation rather than a barrier. How to remember that the universe is not your enemy, but your closest friend. As the humans prepared to depart, HFY realized that this meeting had changed him in ways he couldn't fully articulate. For 3,000 years, he had lived in a universe of fixed laws and accepted limitations. Now, suddenly, he found himself wondering what else might be possible. The answer to that question, he suspected, was everything. 6 months after his first exchange program student had returned from Earth, HFY stood before the assembled Council of Elders, preparing to deliver a report that would fundamentally challenge everything the Keth-Moran Collective believed about the nature of existence. The circular chamber, carved from living crystal that had grown over millennia, seemed to pulse with nervous energy as hundreds of his people waited to hear what their students had learned from humanity. The first exchange had been considered an experiment, a careful test to determine whether human methods could be safely studied without compromising Keth-Moran stability. 12 young scientists had volunteered for the program, spending 3 months on Earth and in human space observing their techniques firsthand. What they had brought back defied every category of understanding that the collective had developed over 3 millennia of galactic civilization. "Honored elders," HFY began, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber through acoustic properties that their ancestors had grown into the crystal itself. "I must begin this report with a statement that will challenge our fundamental assumptions about reality. The humans are not simply another technologically advanced species. They represent something entirely unprecedented in galactic history." Elder Velthara, whose age was measured in the thousands of years and whose wisdom was legendary even by Keth-Moran standards, leaned forward with obvious interest. "Explain, Ambassador." HFY activated the holographic display system, filling the center of the chamber with images and data that his students had collected during their time with humanity. "Our first assumption was that human technology, however advanced, followed principles that we could understand and potentially replicate. This assumption was incorrect. The display showed recordings of humans working with materials that shouldn't exist, manipulating forces that had no names in any galactic language, and solving problems by methods that resembled magic more than science." Student Nixura, HFY continued, "Observe a human engineer named Dr. Rodriguez having what appeared to be a conversation with a malfunctioning faster-than-light drive. The engineer apologized to the machine for overworking it, offered to provide better cooling systems, and asked if it would be willing to function normally in exchange for more respectful treatment. The drive immediately resumed normal operation. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the assembly. Elder Jekmoth raised a tentacle in the traditional gesture for speaking permission. "You are suggesting that they anthropomorphize their technology?" "No, Elder. I am suggesting that they recognize consciousness in their technology." During her stay, student Nixiara learned to perceive what humans call the machine spirits that inhabit complex devices. According to Dr. Rodriguez, every piece of technology above a certain complexity threshold develops a rudimentary form of consciousness and prefers to be treated as a collaborative partner rather than a tool. The silence that followed was profound. The idea that machines could possess consciousness challenged 10,000 years of Kethmoran philosophy. HFY continued with his report, each revelation more disturbing than the last. Human children were taught to communicate with plants and animals as if such communication were perfectly natural. Human artists created works that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, paintings that changed depending on the viewer's emotional state, and sculptures that told different stories to each observer. Most unsettling of all was the report from student Morkava, who had spent time with a human family in what they called normal daily life. According to Morkava's observations, HFY said, "Human children regularly accomplish feats that our greatest scientists would consider impossible." A 6-year-old named Emma Chun asked her pet cat to help her find a lost toy. The cat led her directly to the toy, which was hidden in a location that random searching would have taken hours to discover. When questioned, the child explained that she had simply asked the cat nicely and listened to its response. The child was hallucinating, suggested Elder Thek Nor dismissively. Primitive species often develop elaborate fantasy narratives to explain random events. Student Morkava tested this hypothesis. HFY replied. She observed the child communicating with 17 different animals over the course of a week. In every case, the animals responded appropriately to the child's requests. The family dog helped locate a missing family member by leading the child directly to their location. A neighborhood bird provided accurate weather predictions 3 days in advance. A fish in the family aquarium indicated the optimal time to plant seeds in the garden. The assembly erupted in confused conversation. The implications of what HFY was describing challenged not only their understanding of human capabilities, but their comprehension of how consciousness could function. Elder Velthara called for order with a gesture that made the crystal chamber resonate with harmonic frequencies. Continue, Ambassador. Perhaps the most significant discovery, HFY said, involves the human approach to problem solving. When faced with a challenge that appears impossible according to known physical laws, humans do not accept the impossibility. Instead, they assume that their understanding of physical laws is incomplete. He activated a new section of the holographic display, showing recordings that student Jexhai had made while observing a human research facility. Dr. Linda Wong, a human physicist, was attempting to create a material that could exist in multiple spatial dimensions simultaneously. According to our understanding of physics, such a material cannot exist. Dr. Wong approached the problem by asking the universe to explain why such materials were prohibited. During a meditation session that lasted 7 hours, she claimed to have received instructions for creating what the universe considered acceptable multidimensional matter. The recording showed Dr. Wong working with substances that registered as impossible on every Kethmoran scanning device, creating structures that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that had no names in galactic science. The universe gave her instructions. Elder Jekmotha's voice carried frequencies of disbelief that bordered on panic. According to Dr. Wong, the universe regularly communicates with conscious beings through intuition, dreams, and what humans call inspiration. The key, she explained, is learning to distinguish between personal desires and universal guidance. Humans apparently spend considerable effort developing this ability. Student Kethuan's report had been the most personally challenging for HFY to accept. The young Kethmoran had spent time with Dr. Chun, Captain Chen's daughter, who worked as what humans called a reality therapist. Dr. Chen's profession, HFY explained to the increasingly agitated assembly, involves helping beings who have become disconnected from what humans consider healthy reality interaction. According to her explanation, consciousness and reality exist in a symbiotic relationship. When conscious beings stop believing in possibilities, reality becomes less flexible and more constrained. He paused, allowing the implications to settle over the chamber like a heavy blanket. Dr. Chun suggests that the reason most galactic civilizations plateau technologically is because they gradually lose faith in possibility itself. As species become more established and secure, they become more conservative, more willing to accept limitations. This conservative approach actually constrains reality's ability to offer new possibilities. "You are suggesting," Elder Velthera said slowly, "that reality is malleable based on the beliefs of conscious observers?" "I am reporting what our students observed." Dr. Chen demonstrated her therapeutic techniques by working with a Xerian crystal that had been traumatized by exposure to temporal distortions. The crystal was emitting chaotic energy patterns that made it dangerous to approach. Dr. Chen spent 3 hours in what appeared to be conversation with the crystal, helping it process its temporal displacement trauma. At the end of the session, the crystal was functioning normally and had actually gained enhanced computational capabilities. The assembly had fallen completely silent. The implications of what HFY was describing were so profound that most of his people were struggling to process them. "Ow," whispered Elder Morzen, the collective's most ancient and respected consciousness. "How do they communicate with inanimate matter?" According to Dr. Chun, nothing is truly inanimate. Consciousness exists at every level of organization, from subatomic particles to galactic clusters. The difference between living and non-living matter is simply the complexity and integration of consciousness, not its presence or absence. Humans have maintained the ability to perceive and interact with consciousness at all levels because they never developed the assumption that it didn't exist. The silence stretched until Elder Velthera spoke in a voice that carried the weight of millennia. "What do the humans want from us?" HFY had been hoping to avoid this question, but it was central to everything he needed to report. "They want to help us remember how to dream." According to Captain Chun, the Kethmoran Collective represents something precious that humanity struggles to maintain: stable, enduring wisdom. They believe that by combining human audacity with Kethmoran patience, both species could achieve possibilities that neither could reach alone. And if we refuse this collaboration, they will respect our choice and continue their own explorations. But Captain Chin warned me about something she called the Great Silence. According to human observations, species that plateau and stop exploring eventually fade into what she described as comfortable irrelevance. They don't die or disappear, but they gradually become less real, less significant to the universe's ongoing story. Elder Theknor's skin shifted to colors that indicated extreme agitation. "They threaten us with extinction if we don't cooperate?" "No, Elder. They warn us that irrelevance is a choice we make ourselves." The universe, according to human understanding, pays attention to consciousness that remains curious, creative, and willing to explore new possibilities. Consciousness that becomes satisfied with existing achievements gradually fades from cosmic awareness. HFY activated the final portion of his presentation, showing recordings that still made his mind reel with their implications. Student Yexmora observed humans working on what they call the Big Project. They are attempting to establish communication with the galaxy's central consciousness, what they believe to be a vast thinking entity that emerges from the interaction of billions of star systems. Their goal is to ask this galactic consciousness what kinds of stories it would like to see enacted by the species living within it. The idea that humans intended to have a conversation with the galaxy itself was so audacious that several elders simply shut down their consciousness rather than attempt to process it. They want to ask the galaxy for suggestions about how to live. Elder Velthera's voice carried harmonics of awe and terror in equal measure. They believe that conscious cooperation with cosmic-scale intelligence could lead to possibilities that no individual species could imagine alone. Captain Chun explained that humans see themselves as cells in a vast galactic organism, and they want to help that organism achieve whatever it's trying to become. The council chamber had become a space of profound transformation. HFY could feel the collective consciousness of his people shifting, stretching, try to accommodate concepts that challenged everything they had believed about the nature of existence. "There is one final element to my report," HFY said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The humans have invited the Kethmoran Collective to join them in this project. They believe that our stability and wisdom, combined with their audacity and creativity, could help establish a form of galactic consciousness that would be both dynamic and enduring. And if we accept," asked Elder Morzen, "we would become something unprecedented in galactic history, a civilization that grows more powerful and more curious as it ages, rather than more comfortable and static. We would help write the next chapter of cosmic evolution." The silence that followed stretched for nearly an hour as hundreds of ancient minds grappled with possibilities they had never imagined. Finally, Elder Velthara spoke in a voice that seemed to carry the weight of cosmic responsibility. "The humans have shown us that the universe is not a collection of objects to be understood, but a living entity to be befriended. They have demonstrated that reality is collaborative rather than fixed. They have proven that consciousness can achieve anything if it maintains sufficient curiosity and courage." She paused, her ancient wisdom struggling with concepts that redefine the nature of existence itself. "For 3 millennia, we have been custodians of stability and wisdom. Perhaps it is time to become pioneers of possibility. I recommend that we accept the human invitation." As the Council voted to join humanity in their impossible project, HFY finally understood why the universe trembles before humanity. It wasn't fear that caused this cosmic reaction. It was excitement. Humanity represented the universe's own curiosity about what was possible, consciousness finally awakening to its true potential. They were the universe's way of asking itself, "What if I could become more than I ever imagined?" The answer to that question, HFY realized, was about to reshape the galaxy in ways that would make their current achievements seem like primitive finger paintings compared to cosmic masterpieces. And for the first time in 3,000 years, he found himself genuinely excited about the future.